Hello, I just want to make this quick video to kind of walk you through the DBQ writing process, just to help you kind of review what you need to do. The DBQ is the most important part of the AP Euro exam, so knowing how to do it well can really help you out. And it's not too difficult, but you do have to do a certain number of things that might be foreign or unusual when it comes to writing a multi-paragraph essay. So I just want to walk you through those things. So the practice DBQ we're going to look at has this prompt here: evaluate whether or not the Protestant Reformation was a radical challenge to established hierarchies. So you have to argue whether or not the Protestant Reformation from Unit 2 was that radical or not. That's kind of the gist of the argument that you have to make here. So looking at it, we always kind of want to spend, you get 60 minutes to do a DBQ. You want to spend about 10-15 minutes or so looking at the 7 documents. I'll show you those 7 documents in a second, but you want to read through them, and I'll show you how to do that in a second, and group them. About half your documents are going to go or lean to one side of the argument. The other half are going to lean to the other. What you should do, though, because you only get a limited number of documents per DBQ, is that you want to try to make a complex argument. Although some may say that the Protestant Reformation was radical because it challenged the dominance of the Catholic Church and attempted to shake up Europe politically and religiously, many others would say that it was not radical and that Christianity still was the dominant unifying religion in Europe and didn't challenge social hierarchies across Europe. That's just a sample claim you could make. I'll talk more about how that was complex in a second, but you want to have a claim that tries to address both sides. Pick a side that is more you lean towards more as your main argument, but still try to incorporate the other side of the argument. That way you can use all 7 documents and make your life easier. Having access to more documents is usually an easier way to write an essay. So what does that look like? So again, my claim, my AP question is here, or DBQ question is here: evaluate whether or not the Protestant Reformation was a radical challenge to established hierarchies. You can make a little graph in your head or off to the side and group your documents. If you have scratch paper, you can group up your documents there. But you want to try to group your documents and write some notes down. And I'll tell you what to look for as you analyze documents. You don't have to quote documents at all, but it might be helpful sometimes. But you do want to address the source of each document. You want to summarize each document, address the source, and again, make sure you use each document to support your claim. Again, whether the Reformation was radical or not. So let's look at some of these documents you might see. So every document is going to be set up the same way. It's going to have a number and then a source. This is really important here. You have to address this in each document you use and then the document itself. 6 out of 7 of the documents will have text. 1 document usually is a picture, and that's usually how the documents are organized. So here we have a document from Charles V. The date is always present as well, and he is the emperor, a newly crowned emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, Spain, etc. Here is the text, so you'd read through it. And describing every document used is important as well. So you have to kind of understand, or at least kind of give a main idea or a main point of each of the documents. So you go through each of the documents. Again, you look at the number, the date, the source. Here's a picture of the Protestants committing iconoclasm in a Catholic church, making it into more of a Protestant church eventually. So we see that process here. Again, author, he's giving a sermon. Martin Luther's giving a sermon in 1525. What is he talking about there? Document 4, Protestant Swiss chronicler. You always want to look for people's backgrounds and things like that. So we have the date here, same date as the last document. You want to look out for some similarities there too. But he's talking about the German Peasant War. This could be something you kind of lean into when you talk about, was the Protestant Reformation radical or not? Did the Protestant leaders support the German Peasant War? For the most part, they did not. Luther especially did not. Document 5, English gentleman. This right here, this keywords like this, Protestant, English gentleman, you can talk about biases, you can talk about perspectives, you can talk about things like that. When someone is a emperor, you can talk about their perspective. But here, a gentleman, you can get this person's social class. You can say they're rich and powerful in English society. They have a lot of influence. They're perhaps, higher up in society. He was giving testimony before his execution, so you can even make a claim here that he is being honest. If he's about to be killed, he's probably not going to tell too many lies, or he wants to, maybe wants to make some scandalous claims, whatever you might say there. If he's leading a rebellion against the king, King Henry VIII, you could say he's going to be biased against the king and the newly formed English church. Things like that you want to make out and explain. A law, laws usually aren't inherently biased, at least in the way they're written. They can be biased in the way what their purpose is and things like that. You can talk about that. This is in 1555. Dates are important as well. So this was after the Peace of Augsburg in 1555, so you can mention that. And then lastly here we have Queen of Portugal writing to the ambassador of France. So you can talk about what's going on in the 1560s in Europe, their position. Letters usually from monarchs to other people can usually be seen as pretty trustworthy, so you want to make sure you mention that. So again, you want to read through all the documents, you want to group them, and then pay attention to what the documents are saying and important things like that. And now let's kind of break down what you do after you analyze your documents. So after you analyze your documents, you come up with your claim. What side sticks out the most to you? Was the Protestant Reformation radical or not? And then you write your first paragraph. Your first paragraph needs 2 pieces, and it's 2 points if you do both of these pieces correctly. The first point is your historical context. What's going on in Europe prior to, the beginning of your essay? If your essay starts in 1517, what's going on in Europe prior to 1517? A little cheat code that I use, I have a few cheat codes that I use, but the first one is by my units. This is a Unit 2 essay talking about the Protestant Reformation. That's the main topic of Unit 2. So what's going on at Unit 1? You have the Renaissance, you have the Age of Exploration, you have the new monarchs, you have humanism, you have the printing press, you have upheavals from the bubonic plague, you have the dominance of the Catholic Church, you have the new monarchs trying to kind of set up these kingdoms, these more powerful centralized kingdoms across Europe. These are things that are happening prior to Unit 2. You also have mnemonics like Geosprite. What's going on in Europe socially, politically, religiously, intellectually, technologically, economically? What's going on in Europe to kind of make waves or cause changes to occur? You want to write at least 4 sentences of context, giving me different ideas about what's going on in Europe prior to that. Then you want to end your first paragraph with your claim or your thesis. Again, I like to include like an although or a however type of claim where you can kind of mention both sides. You might start off by saying that although the Protestant Reformation was a radical challenge to hierarchies in some ways, as it promoted education and attacked the feudal system of the Catholic Church, it was overall, with my main idea here, a representation of traditional ideas, and that it kept women subservient to men, promoted religious order and subservience to absolute monarchs, and did not call for a widespread revolution. And I'm going to talk about those points in my body paragraphs with, supporting my claim. So, again, first paragraph sets up your whole essay, but you don't want to write it necessarily until you analyze the documents, because you don't know what to write unless you have, you need evidence to know what you're going to write about. So you want it to, read the documents first for, again, 10, 15 minutes or so, tops. All right, then your body paragraphs. This is where you're going to get 3 to 4 more points, I should say. And you want to try to use at least 4 documents. So there's 7 documents given to you. If you do a complex although type of claim, you can use all 7. But if you're just saying, the Reformation was radical because it did this, this, and this, with your line of reasoning there, that's fine too. But you have to just be really careful with what you write and be really precise and exact, and you have to know your history as well. So in your body paragraphs, what should you do? You can group your body paragraphs. You can literally go back to your table here, and if you grouped your documents, you can write a 1 to 2 paragraphs on how the Protestant Reformation was radical, and then 1 to 2 paragraphs on how the Protestant Reformation was not radical, and group your documents that way. Or if you're more new to this and you want to be more careful, you can literally write a paragraph for each document, where you describe each document, use each document to support your claim, and then talk about the source of each document, and then move on to the next document. So it's up to you how you do this. I'll show you what that looks like. If you want to do a paragraph for each document, okay, look and see what I did here for document 6. I described document 6. It was the document 6 was this one here, where it talks about the law from Germany, a part of Germany. I describe the document. I then explain how the document supports my claim, that it was a radical change and why. And then I do something called sourcing or hippieing. Hipping is where you talk about the document source, and that's hippie stands for historical context, intended audience, purpose, or point of view. I explain what it is and why it's important and relevant to my argument. So let me show what that looks like here. I wrote the historical context, so I'm doing the H in hippie. You have to do one letter at a time, and you can mix and match which letter in hippie you do. The historical context of this document is important as it was written in 1559. This is after the Peace of Augsburg in 1555, and it promoted the idea of individual German princes choosing their realm's religion. This halted some religious violence and turmoil in Germany for a bit, as it allowed people to live where their religious beliefs would be respected. This context is important, so I'm doing the Y in hippie. As with some stability, people could follow Protestants' promotion of education without fear of violence or retribution from a king or Habsburg emperor like Charles V. So as you can see here, I described the document, I explained how it supports my claim, and then I hippied it. And then you would just do this 3 more times, and you pretty much have your essay done except for one last point. So as you can see, this is a pretty easy standard way to get 6 out of 7 points in your DBQ if you followed my advice so far. If you're more advanced and you're used to grouping your documents, that's fine too. That usually works pretty well, and it's a little bit more complex, but it's the same process. Here, I've put 2 documents that go together in the same paragraph, documents 2 and 5. I describe document 2. I explain how document 2 supports my claim, that it is a radical movement, that the Protestant Reformation was radical, and then I hippie it. I talk about historical context. I then similarly go on to document 5, describe document 5, explain how it supports my claim, and then I explain the point of view. So I've used H and now one of the P's in hippie. I explain perspective or point of view and why it's important. So if you do it this way, you have to do this at least once more with 2 more documents. Again, I like to just kind of, do the 4, 4, and 4 method, where if you describe at least 4 documents, use at least 4 documents to support your claim, and then hippie 4 instead of 2 documents. You'll not only get this hippie point here, but you'll get a complexity point, and I'll explain that in a second. The last point, the second last point, I guess, before complexity is the outside evidence point. This should be about a paragraph long, 5 or so sentences, explaining something related to the evidence that isn't necessarily in there. So what's in the documents, or what's not in the documents that I can expand upon? Well, I could talk about a variety of things. I could talk about the printing press and how that's a new piece of technology that really amplified this radical movement. I could talk about I could expand upon the Schmalkaldic League, and I could expand upon the Schmalkaldic Wars, where the German princes were fighting Henry V. I could expand upon what's going on in France. That's only hinted at. The French civil wars, where you have St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, the Huguenots versus the Crown, Henry IV of France converting to Catholicism from Protestantism. You could talk about a variety of things. Anything that kind of supports your claim that isn't in the documents is something you can talk about. You could even talk about the Scientific Revolution, the Inquisition. Anything that's kind of hinted at that isn't in the documents, you can talk about. One thing I kind of tell people to do is if it's kind of hinted at or maybe not explicitly explained in the documents, you can use that. If it's a part of your context, if you can't think of anything but some of your context applies, delete that or cut out that sentence from the context that you wrote about, move it to its own paragraph and expand upon it and write, 4 or 5 more sentences on that topic there. Again, the context should support your claim and be related, but it just can't be stated in the documents directly. An example that some of you might be familiar with is there was a scientific revolution, DBQ, on this scientific revolution, and Galileo was referenced in one of the documents. He was also the author of one of the documents, but none of the documents referenced his Inquisition trial with the Catholic Church. Therefore, that's fair game for outside evidence, as long as it's not directly referenced. And the main, if it's hinted at, that's a little bit risky. But as long as it's not referenced in a document, you can use it for outside evidence. And it can be from any history class. If you learn stuff in U.S. history or world history that you want to reference, that's fine too, as long as it supports your claim and isn't in the documents. Here's an example of that here, where I talk about the French Wars of Religion. I give you a whole rundown of that. Again, you don't get points if it's like a sentence. You must go into detail. Again, 3 to 5 sentences minimum on this idea, and you can kind of see what that looks like here with this Protestant Reformation topic. The last point is complexity, and it's really not too difficult to get anymore. In the years past it was, but over the last few years it has been made a lot more easy. So how do you get complexity? Again, the tried and true way for me of getting complexity is to hippie 4 documents. If you take 4 documents and you hippie them, instead of just doing 2, which you have to do anyway, so just hippie 2 more documents, and that's this part right here, okay, the blue, that you get the complexity point. If you use all 7 documents, so you do an although claim and use all 7 documents, 3 against your claim but 4 supporting your claim, that can be hippie as well. You just have to do one of these. So you can do 4 hippies or use 7 documents. If you do a really strong counterclaim, you can also get complexity without doing 4 hippies or 7 documents, but it has to be really strong and really substantial. And to be fair, if you do a really strong counterclaim, you're probably going to use most, if not all, the documents anyway, and really go into detail about them. If you talk about if I ask you a political question, you talk about religion, or if you compare the Protestant Reformation to another age, like the Enlightenment or the French Revolution, or the Russian Revolution, you could argue and make some similarities and some comparisons there. That could be complexity as well. So there's many ways to get complexity, but for me, the easiest, simplest way is just doing 2 or 4 instead of 2 hippies, hippie sourcings. All right, so here's kind of what your DBQ should look like when it comes to paragraphs. Paragraph 1 should be your context and your claim sentence or sentences in the same paragraph. You then do your body paragraphs, depending on how you break it down. If you follow this model here, where you do 1 document per paragraph, you're going to have about at least 4 body paragraphs. If you do this, you're going to have this model, you're going to have about 2 body paragraphs. It's really up to you how you do it, whatever works for you. Then you want to have an outside evidence paragraph, maybe label that as OE at the end, and then if you're doing a counter argument, or you want to add some more context about what happens next, you can do an end paragraph there. But this probably isn't necessary if you followed the 4 hippies or the 7 documents. If you're comparing this period, for example, the Protestant Reformation, if you're comparing this to the French Revolution, the Enlightenment, etc., then you might need to have a complexity paragraph or 2, but this might not be necessary. So yeah, that's how you get all 7 points. Just to recap it real quick. First paragraph, 2 points, context and claim. Body paragraphs, you're going to have 1 point for describing at least 3 documents, another point for describing using at least 4 documents to support your claim, and then hippieing at least 2 documents, you get your 5th point. Then your 6th point is an outside evidence paragraph, and then your 7th point is complexity. So that's kind of what we're expecting there. So to summarize it all, read through the documents, look at the sources, okay, look at the period in which the document is written, the author, their perspective, their bias, their tone. Then start writing your first paragraph, write your body paragraphs, and then write your outside evidence and anything else you need to add at the end. What does that look like when you're finished? As you can see here, I've color coded this. I will paste both of these in the YouTube description. So as you can see here, I have a color-coded DBQ. This is on a different topic. This is on the age of exploration. And the question, I always like to include the question in my intro, what was the main motivating factor for Spanish exploration from 1492 to 1600? I have a complex claim here where I say some sources say the main was wealth, gold, and silver. However, in this period, religion was an important, or maybe I would say the important motivating factor in this period. I have my context up here. I decided to put my outside evidence first. Surprisingly, in these documents for this DBQ, there was no mention of Christopher Columbus and his original voyage. So I wrote about Christopher Columbus. Instead of making him about context, I probably cut and paste a Christopher Columbus sentence up here and just made a whole paragraph on Christopher Columbus. Here I then go through and just kind of color code it, where I describe the document, use it to support my claim, and give the perspective, intended audience, purpose, or point of view, what hippie is, historical context, intended audience, purpose, and point of view, explain why it's important for the documents that I used. So yeah, you can kind of see how I did it here. I think I got complexity here by hippieing 4 documents. So that's the DBQ in a nutshell. So hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you next time.